We are on page 374. We're starting screencast number 2 for lesson 3 of unit 7. We're talking about erosion and deposition. Erosion is the transporting of rock, sediment, and soil from one place to another, while deposition is the laying down of rock, sediment, and soil. So erosion and deposition work together, constantly shaping and reshaping Earth's surface. Basically, erosion is picking up rock and sediment and moving it, and deposition is setting it down. So picking it up and setting it down. What causes erosion and deposition? Well, several of the same agents that we looked at that were agents of weathering are going to cause erosion and deposition as well. We're looking at wind, water, ice, gravity. Those are all erosional agents. Wind, water, ice, and gravity are also agents of deposition. Okay? Wind, water, ice, gravity. Okay? And we mention those as agents of erosion also. So we're talking about the same things over and over when we're talking about what is responsible for weathering and erosion and deposition. All right, water specifically. It says moving millions of tons of sediment would be a very tough job if we were going to pick up the sediment and move it ourselves. But flowing water, such as rivers that are moving, does this job every day. The Mississippi River is a nice muddy color because of all the sediment that it's carrying. The Mississippi and pretty much any other river deposits much of this sediment where it empties into a bigger body of water. For the Mississippi, that's going to be the Gulf of Mexico. And sediment is deposited at the mouth of the river because sediment's going to drop out of the water as the water slows down. And water typically slows down as it reaches the ocean. So you get this big flat pile of sediment that's being set down, and that forms, sorry about that, the big fan of sediment that's being set down forms a river delta. Okay, so down here, just a reminder, the force of moving water can pick up and carry sediment. The force of moving water can pick up and carry a whole lot. I mean, this is why you don't want to cross a flooded river, because you think, oh, I'm safe in my big old car, but the force of a lot of water moving quickly can pick up a car or anything else in its path and carry it along, shove it out of the way. So the force of moving water can pick up and carry sediment, and the faster that water moves, the bigger pieces of sediment that it can pick up and move. So if you're talking about a stream that's moving slowly, it might pick up and carry small pieces of sediment, and maybe a little bit bigger pieces of sediment sort of bounce along and get pushed along the bottom. But if you're talking about a river that's moving very, very quickly, it can carry larger pieces of sediment, just because the force of the moving water is greater. All right, so now I'm on page 375. Okay. All right, so we talked about the causes of erosion and deposition, okay, or agents of erosion and deposition. We talked about water. Ice is another agent of erosion and deposition. A lot of times the ice is in the form of a glacier, and a glacier is a large mass of ice. It's just basically a sheet of ice that exists year-round and flows slowly over land. It flows slowly over land because basically when new snow falls, it pushes down, the weight of that new snowfall pushes down on the layers below it and basically causes it to ooze down a mountainside or what have you. So it pushes it down. Okay? Now, as glaciers move, they act like giant bulldozers. I mean, you've got a solid sheet of ice that's just going to push everything in front of it along with it. Okay? So it's going to erode soil and sediment and rock. and even large boulders, and it can move those things over great distances. Okay. The Great Lakes, up there in the Michigan, Michigan and Minnesota and that area, those lakes up there were formed by glaciers. Okay. Agent of erosion and deposition number 3 is wind. Okay. Similar to water, wind can pick up and carry soil and sediment. Obviously, wind doesn't have the weight behind it that water does, but it can still pick up soil and sediment and move it. And again, the faster the wind is blowing, the more soil and sediment it's capable of picking up and moving. Okay? And we've already talked about wind because we did talk about the fact that wind will weather rock by abrasion, because wind picks up sediment and blows it against rock, which basically is acting like a sandblaster to erode those rock pieces. Okay? Wind erosion and deposition can form sand dunes, which are a very common feature along shorelines and in deserts. Okay, agent of erosion and deposition number 4 is gravity. Okay, the force of gravity is going to cause things to want to move down towards the center of the earth. And so if you're talking about something perched up on a high mountainside, the force of gravity may eventually cause it to tumble down the side of the mountain. Okay, so gravity causes rock and soil to move down a slope, and that's a process known as mass movement. Okay, some of the things, some of the features that are formed specifically by the mass movement of rock is something called a talus. It's just like a big pile of debris at the bottom of a hill or a mountain. Okay. All right, let's flip to page 376 and 377. All right, we're going to go through shore shapers real quickly. How can weathering and erosion shape coastal features? And it says, as you read, underline examples of land features shaped by weathering and erosion along a shoreline. So now we're specifically talking about at the beach. Ocean waves and currents play a large role in shaping Earth's shorelines where land and water meet. You need to know what a current is. A current is a stream-like movement of water. Physical weathering and chemical weathering break down rock. You can form steep sea cliffs. Okay, for instance, this down here would be a sea cliff. A flat shelf of rock called a wave-cut platform can also be formed, something like this down here, right here. A sea cave could form also as a result of weathering and erosion. Okay, so a sea cave is like a little hollowed out area. If a sea cave becomes, if the water winds up penetrating all the way through, it'll become a sea arch. And if the sea arch collapses, it'll become a sea stack. Okay. Some parts of a shoreline may erode faster than others. Headlands are rocky pieces of land that project out into water. Okay. An example would be right here. Okay. How might continued weathering and erosion affect this sea arch over time? This one. It may weaken the arch, causing it to eventually collapse. And if it collapses, it will be a sea stack. All right. On page 377, here we go. How can deposition shape coastal features? All right. Ocean waves and ocean currents do more than weather and erode sea cliffs, sea caves, and sea arches. Waves and currents also deposit material to form features. Okay, so over here, we were talking about erosion primarily and what it does to coastal features. Okay, over here, we're talking primarily about deposition and how it forms coastal features. All right. So waves and currents deposit material to form features. Beaches are going to be your main feature along a coast, showing you coastal deposition. Okay. When wave action loosens rock material, currents that run parallel to the shore, those are called longshore currents, erode the material and deposit it offshore. And they can, over time, form features such as a sand spit, which is basically a ridge of sand, gravel, or shell material that extends from a shoreline line, such as this down here. Okay. Over time, a barrier island could also form. It's a long, narrow island that forms parallel to the shoreline, and it's a short distance offshore. Shoreline features are constantly changing as a result of weathering, erosion, and deposition. One of the big things that happened during Superstorm Sandy, which hit the East Coast, is that the actual location of the shoreline and the location of sand dunes and things like that changed. Okay. Padre Island at the southern end of Texas is actually a barrier island. So that's one that you may be familiar with. It's an example.